Disabled and Proud, Disabled Voices of Color Speaker Series. It is such an honor to have our second Disabled Voices of Color Speaker Series of the year. My name is Jessica Riestra. I am going to be one of your moderators. Just to give you a quick image description of myself, I am a brown woman with brown eyes, dark brunette hair. I am wearing a blue/green sweater, and I have my background is one of Ryan Eastwoodley, which is also a white/blue background with his photo, and then the Yo Disabled and Proud logo. And I'll pass it to my guest speaker, Miss Cami.
Hi everyone, my name is Cami Marble. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a white woman with short brown hair, and I'm wearing blue round glasses, and I have a light blue Yo Disabled Voices of Color speaker series background behind me. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few basic Zoom accessibility things. So for captions, you can press the CC button in the toolbar and then select Show Subtitles, and the subtitles should be available for you. We also have a stream text link available in the chat, and we have our wonderful ASL interpreters here for us as well. And then some more things on Zoom. We have the Q&A function where you can put in your questions for Ryan Easterly. We'll be getting to our Q&A later in the event. You can also raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask your question if that is more accessible. And feel free to use the chat for any accessibility or technical support needs.
Everyone, I am back. Let's talk a little bit about our Disabled Voices of Color speaker series. As I mentioned, this is a monthly installment, with this being our second one of the year. Beyond that, what we typically do in these Disabled Voices of Color series installments is that we invite disability activists to speak about their advocacy within the community and how the youth can get involved. A great example is that back in January, we had Mia Mingus be our guest speaker, and we are very fortunate to be able to continue this for the rest of the year.
We also want to tell you about some other programs that we have going on at Yo right now. So this is something that's super exciting to me. I am the host of the Disability Belongs podcast, and we have our second episode coming out later next week. You can find us on Instagram at disability_belongs_podcast. And we are available on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. And then if you want to go ahead and follow our Yo social medias, we are at Yo Disabled and Proud on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And before we move on anymore, I'd like to say some special thanks today to our CFILC team and our mentors here for sharing their wisdom and assisting with this event, to our wonderful guest, Ryan Easterly, for taking the time out of his day to be here and speak with us, and to our amazing ASL interpreters and captioners for providing our access needs.
With that in mind, now it gives me such an honor to know that I am going to be talking a little bit about Ryan Easterly before he comes on and speaks. So Ryan Easterly is an experienced grant maker, strategist, and advocate who is driven by a desire to effect meaningful change. Ryan has worked in philanthropy for more than a decade. Ryan has also held multiple positions within the HSC Foundation and currently serves as executive director of the WITH Foundation, which is a private foundation that promotes comprehensive healthcare for adults with developmental disabilities in the United States. Ryan was also appointed by President Obama to the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. He also now serves as member of the President's Council on Disability Inclusion and Philanthropy, and serves as co-chair of Exponent Philanthropy's Disability Funders Peer Circle. And now, with further ado, I'll let Mr. Ryan introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jessica. I'm so pleased to be here. As I get started, I want to provide a visual description. I am a Black identifying man with black hair, wearing black glasses, a black jacket with a teal shirt, and I'm sitting in front of a white wall with diplomas on it. My pronouns are he and him. I also come to you today from the land of the Ohlone people, now known as Redwood City, California. So I'm so pleased to be a part of today's conversation.
All right, with that in mind, we'll get started with the questions. So we'll quickly start with saying, well, for one, hello, Ryan. We are very appreciative of you joining us today. You're Disabled and Proud is excited to have you as our second Disabled Voices of Color speaker. This series is important to us because we believe that intentionally making space for disabled leaders of color is critical for disabled youth to learn from, but really anyone. The last couple of years have really impacted the disability community in profound ways, and frankly, we're not talking about it enough. I wanted to start today's conversation by asking you, how have you been doing during this pandemic?
I think like many of us in the disability community, it's had some ups and downs, some really difficult moments and some moments that have been okay. For myself personally, I have lost two people that are close to me during the pandemic. So I, like many individuals, have been on my journey in the grieving process and dealing with the absence of those two individuals from my life. But overall, I do think I am remaining hopeful that from this moment in time and from these conversations and the way that the pandemic and other issues have really magnified the issues that the disability community has been so often bringing up, and especially people of color with disabilities have been bringing up, that maybe this will amount to some real meaningful change. So I feel like I have gone through it, but I'm remaining hopeful.
No, and I hear you, and I also empathize with that. Like, I know what it means to lose family members due to COVID. So like that's something that's also important for me, and it's also important seeing like how just like our disabled voices of color, like folks who are like such leaders and like this disability justice realms are really pushing for change in multiple directions. So I feel your sense of being hopeful, because I am very hopeful to be able to see a lot of constructive change and seeing everyone come together, because like now people are rallying for systemic change. So that's something that it truly like embodies leadership and something that excites me to be able to see what the future holds. With that leads towards another question, which is, during an interview that was shared with Stanford Social Innovation, you talked about health equity. And you also mentioned like the importance of health and like how health has affected some of like your family members. So my question would be, what does health equity mean to you, and how does your foundation promote it and engage disabled youth in it? Beyond that, the second portion to that question would be, why should disabled youth care about this stuff?
So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the work of WITH Foundation. So ultimately, WITH Foundation promotes comprehensive healthcare for adults with developmental disabilities in the United States. So when I say that, we're really looking to support comprehensive service delivery models for healthcare for adults with developmental disabilities. So, and I would say we specifically look to support programming and healthcare service delivery that engages individuals with disabilities as experts and leaders in their care. And also we look to support training for medical professional that also engages people with disabilities as experts and leaders in helping design that training. In addition to promoting kind of cultural competency for medical professionals, I think we are also very intentional about trying to promote that healthcare training and healthcare services are also done from approach of cultural humility. And when I say cultural humility, I'm referring to a framework that acknowledges that cultural humility is really a lifelong process that examines the balance of power that exists between organizations, communities, and individuals when they're interacting with one another. So making sure that, we're all acknowledging and all doing our best to acknowledge our own privileges. So in my case, I do I hold many historically resilient identities, but I do have some privileges in that I identify as male. I have been in the working world for a while, so I'm on my own journey of making sure that I'm examining myself and how I interact in different spaces. So we encourage that in the programs that we support. How can young people get involved? With Foundation is one of the few foundations in the country that engages people with disabilities in all aspects of our operation. So we have people with disabilities reflected within our leadership, within our board of directors, as well as we have a self-advocate advisory committee that advises us on all of our grant making. So because our mission is focused on adults with developmental disabilities, we do define young person as 18 and older. I know, youth is actually younger than that, but in our case, because we do look at the whole lifespan of the individual with disabilities, our young end would be 18 and older. So really, through our board of directors, through our leadership, and through the advisory committee, and becoming involved in the advisory committee, that's how younger folks can help us in our work. I'd also say through our funding, we also encourage many healthcare organizations to, again, engage people with disabilities as experts and leaders. So it is our hope that many of you today are contacted by some of the organizations we fund for them to ask you and engage you as experts and leaders in helping them craft and design and deliver these healthcare service delivery programs, these training programs that we support. As far as what it means to me, we do this all ultimately because I hope that through us and what we support, it enables me as an individual who identifies as Black, gay, person with a disability, that it enables healthcare professionals to understand and acknowledge and provide services for me as a whole person. I will admit that, even though I run a healthcare foundation, I still struggle with finding good healthcare service providers. I, like many of you, I'm sure, made the decision to, for my primary healthcare provider, he doesn't know as much about one of my particular disabilities, cerebral palsy, but I made the decision to go with him because he's willing to learn and he has an openness to have some of these difficult conversations related to my disability. So it is my hope that through the work we support, that really all people with disabilities, but especially adults with developmental disabilities, can receive care, high quality health care, but really when delivering that health care, that it acknowledges aspects of who we all are, all the identities we carry, all of our experiences.
I hear you. Like, I truly do. Like, I do know the sense of loss just because, like, not having the appropriate, like, healthcare system, like, that's being able to take care of it. Like, I do come from, like, an immigrant background. So, like, my grandmother, like, passed away because she didn't get the proper healthcare system. So, like, I feel that and I hear that. And I think it's very important, like, in all ages, like, making sure that people understand kind of, like, what type of healthcare system it's appropriate for them, like how could they be able to utilize and get those benefits and so on, because I think oftentimes it's due to the lack of resources that are not provided towards people. it makes it so much hard to like be able to like get access to that information. So do you know that I appreciate the work that you do, because like honestly, as someone that does come from like a background where disability is not necessarily mentioned as much, just because as you mentioned, I also come from like a background where I fit multiple groups, from being like a queer woman of color who like is like so on, goes like has a disability and so on. I already have so many disadvantages, so like I do come from that where like my parents don't like talking about that, when like they also have like already other aspects that already oppress them. So like please do know I appreciate you very much and the work that you are doing, because it truly does mean a lot. So yeah, going with that into like our next question would be, can you share some ideas on ways you believe we can advocate to get local, state, and national government to provide equitable and inclusive healthcare system?
Well, I think there are multiple ways to be an advocate and multiple ways to advocate, but I want to start by acknowledging that, especially for people of color with disabilities, your existence and my existence is revolutionary. So just the fact that you have made it this far, that you're here today, that you continue to engage in your communities and you continue to live your lives, I think we always need to be mindful of the work that we put in just to get that far. So never forget, that your existence is revolutionary in itself, that just by you being in rooms and by you doing what you do, you are creating change. I would say when you're engaging with policymakers, with influencers, with key individuals of your community, do what you can to share your experiences, especially be intentional about talking about your experiences as people of color. So often when we talk about disability, the disability experience, disability rights, the representation can lead you to believe, that it's white individuals. And although they are a significant portion of our community, when you look at the statistics from the CDC, 1 in 4 Black Americans experiences a disability. And when you can combine all the data, it's Black women that most experience, are most impacted by disability. So do what you can to raise that up when you're communicating about your experience, when you're talking about disability, tell them about the data, tell them about your experiences. And as they say, as a recovering DCer, as a recovering federal employee, all politics are local. So you can advocate by sharing your personal experience, by getting as granular as you can about, this is the issue I struggle most with, whether it be transportation, whether it be finding access to family planning, mental health services. So by being intentional and communicating the issues that you're dealing with in the ways that you feel most comfortable, that creates larger ripples. Sometimes we convince ourselves that we only make a difference if we can talk about things on a larger scale, speaking from a national perspective. But again, I encourage you to always remember politics are always local. So by sharing your individual experience, you are creating those ripples of change.
I think that just makes such an impact with everyone, like at least with me, because like more often than not, we're talking so much about like policy and like all different things. And sometimes we don't delve as much as we would want into our own personal story of self and like, why is it that we care so much about this? So like, I think that like you bring such an important point. Like, I know that more often than not, at least speaking for myself, because like, I don't want to speak for anyone, that like, I'm so used to talking about like, when I'm like in the realm like of a policy issue, but like not necessarily my own individual issues, like why does like Jessica care about this issue? Like, why does this affect me? So like, I feel that like, I think it's really important to like delve into those individual stories, because that's what relates to people. So like I appreciate that, and thank you honestly for like reminding me of like why I'm here and kind of like why like I'm doing the work that I am doing, and like why I'm trying to like create a better like community for like all those around me.
Well,
Um
and I just want to take a moment and thank you for remaining open. I know sometimes it is harder to think about, sharing bits of ourselves and bits of our experience in the work we do. So I want to thank you for what you're doing and acknowledge that, many of us, like it does take some energy and take some time to share of ourselves, but really by doing that, you are creating larger scale change.
for sure. And going on that, we're gonna touch like on an issue that's also very like important, like in how it affects us, which is ableism. And as we know, ableism is slowly becoming a more integrated discussion point in society, but still has a long way to go. During these past 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected every person in the country in diverse ways. When bringing attention to disproportionately impacted communities, what do you think justice and liberation in the healthcare system means for them? In addition, what does justice and liberation personally mean to you?
I think justice and liberation in healthcare, that journey, we have a long way to go. There are well-intentioned organizations, well-intentioned advocates that are really just in the beginning stages of learning about what liberation and what disability justice actually looks like. So I want to acknowledge that, and as far as the healthcare space, we do have a long way to go. Even some of our veteran organizations are still on that learning journey. I think it's important first and foremost for healthcare organizations, healthcare providers to start by acknowledging the history of trauma that people with disabilities have in regards to receiving healthcare services. Whether it be the history of eugenics or things like Tuskegee, just acknowledging that it is not all to do with people with disabilities, but there is a history of trauma that we're all grappling with in our individual ways. So starting there and acknowledging that as part of the process, part of what the healthcare sector needs to understand, and the place in which they need to work from, that understanding that there is that history of trauma. As far as what it can look like, I think it's to touch on what we previously discussed. To me, really liberation within healthcare settings really would be for people of color, people with disabilities of color, to really be understood and seen for all their identities, to receive care in ways that are culturally competent, and ways that use cultural humility in delivering that care for all their identities, all their experiences. And what it means for me is, along the same lines. I want to be able to know that, myself and my friends and family and folks that I'm in community with, that they can go to the doctor and they don't feel the need to be like, okay, today we're going to discuss disability issues. Today we're going to discuss gay issues. Today, I'm going to talk about family planning. That, whoever I am, whoever I care about, that their medical provider, that the people they're in community with are seeing the totality of their identity, the totality of their experience.
Wow. Like I must say, honestly, it does mean a lot. Like I guess for me, and like I connect with like all this just because I know the pain of losing like a loved one due to like lack of proper healthcare access. And it's still painful for me because like as I mentioned, being like born here and then coming from like an immigrant community, like a lot of responsibility fell upon me, like being able to like take care of it. So I know a lot of the issues that exist within the healthcare system because I had to confront it at a very young age. So like I honestly feel empowered by what you are saying about like the ways that have yet to go when it comes towards healthcare, and like what can be able to be done and how we could be able to come together to be able to like address those issues, because it's very important. And I think like healthcare, we talk a lot about like changes and so on, but I think a lot of it has to start within the healthcare process, because obviously that's like what directly is affecting each and every single one of us. So yeah, thank you. Honestly, you got me emotional just because like I really connect with this, because been it's been 2 years and it's still painful to be able to talk about that. So yeah, but with that, I also want to lead towards like another important discussion item, which is I am part of a large group of disabled leaders that has been discussing how the LGBTQIA plus intersects with disability rights. As I mentioned, I'm a queer woman, so like for me, this is also something that is very important. And we are currently working towards ensuring all our community members feel heard and understood. What advice would you provide to disabled LGBTQIA plus people who are feeling like they are not being heard and are trying to find their place within the disability community?
So first, I want to start by saying, and if you hear nothing else, as a gay man myself, I want you to know you're not alone. I feel like so often many of us with disabilities who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, it's easier for us to feel alone and isolated. So please know you are not alone. I myself, as a result of my disabilities, I don't drive. So I've had the experience of I have to live in areas that have access to public transportation. So that's led me to live in DC and now in the Bay Area. And I will say my exposure to those two areas and doing work in disability, disability has very gay spaces, has very LGBTQ plus spaces. So, there are many of us doing this work. There are many of us here. So trust and believe you are not alone. I would encourage you first and foremost to try and find a core group of LGBTQ plus folks with disabilities that you trust, that you feel like you can come to and just decompress about your experience. Share like some of the difficulties you're facing. Obviously, right now in a pandemic, connection is hard. Connection with folks you don't know can be hard, but you can look at online. There are many active voices and active individuals on Twitter to reach out to. I would also say, if you don't know anyone, send me an email and I'll help connect you with folks. But try to find a core group of individuals that you can share your experience with safely and comfortably, and just have a core group of folks that you can talk to about your own experience. And then the other part I would mention is let's be frank. It can be hard for especially people of color with disabilities who are part of the LGBTQ plus community to engage in these traditional LGBTQ spaces. There are legitimate access issues. There are physical barriers. There are attitudinal barriers. So it is going to be hard. Not every space is welcoming. I wish it was different, but facts are facts. But for me personally, I would encourage you, if you can find that core group of folks that you can decompress and share your experience with, and they can help build you up, hopefully that will give you the energy to do like I sometimes do. There's a little bit of part of me that I love showing up to places where I'm not expected to be. So if you can find the energy within yourself to go to that LGBTQ event that is going to be difficult, that you may not see others like you there, and just be like, hey, I'm here. Start those conversations, because whether or not you realize it, again, your presence, your existence will create those ripples of change. folks that engage with you will have to be like, well, wait, there are individuals that are part of this community. I didn't realize, was I thinking about access? Did I imagine someone like Jessica would attend my event? So when you can, and I know it can be draining, but when you have the energy, please continue to try to show up and engage in traditional gay and LGBTQ plus spaces. Also, understand that in those moments where you don't have the energy, that is okay. Again, life is hard, especially when you are multi-marginalized. We deal with a lot. We have a lot on our shoulders. So you don't have to be all things to all people at all time. That's not sustainable. I don't want that for you. I don't want that for myself. So when you don't have the energy, are there ways that you can support individuals that are intentional in addressing and working within gay spaces? So off the top of my head, there are individuals like Andrew Garza that he is out of Canada, but he works on having gay orgies and making spaces that are physically accessible. There are different people and individuals that podcast about creating more accessible LGBTQ spaces. So are there ways that you can be intentional in supporting and elevating the folks that are making this their lives work, that are engaging on a daily basis, and this is what they're truly passionate about? Because you don't have to be all things to all people, and if there are ways that you can elevate others that are truly passionate, do that. So hopefully that's helpful.
It is, honestly. You just brought a huge smile on my face, honestly, because I truly believe sometimes it's so important to have these hard dialogues, for what some people, in a way, sometimes people get uncomfortable, but it's important to bring this conversation to be able to move past that. So I appreciate you saying sometimes go into stuff where you're not necessarily involved in, to be able to have that dialogue. For me, that means a lot, because I think that's how we start addressing change and start adapting towards changes as they start happening. So honestly, thank you. And also, it's also great to be able to establish a sense of community with that we could establish a sense of community with people that are able to go through similar experiences, and being able to reach out towards folks, because that's what it's all about, being building community amongst one another and being able to help support one another, especially in hard times. And as you mentioned, when you fit multiple groups, it becomes hard, and sometimes needing a sense of space away from it all, but also knowing that you could be able to rely upon someone to be able to be your person to go to, and being able to have that open dialogue with them, especially when you're going through those dark times. With that in mind, I do have one final question before we go into the Q&A section, which is, Yo Disabled and Proud wants to do more to lift the voices and advocacy and advocate priorities of disabled people in multiple marginalized communities. A lot of the times, youth who join Yo share stories about how they did not know there was a disability community or a place where they could connect with other people like them until after high school. I could attest to that because I was one of those. How did you initially connect to the disability community? What advice would you give to other youth that are not sure where they belong, how to plug in, but are working to getting involved and becoming their own self-advocate?
So I want to start by acknowledging that I had a benefit that other people in communities and other people I know did not have, in that my adopted mother was actually a special ed school teacher. So she and I did have conversations related to my disability in ways that some other families, some other individuals did not have. So I did benefit from that. And then I want to acknowledge my participation in two different programs. The first one is I participated in a program in middle school called Kids Saving Kids. that was a peer mentoring program that got me used to talking to my peers and supporting and coaching my peers. And it was that I first really began to understand that, my experience is a little bit different, that, my having a disability does make you look at things through a different lens. And it was through that program that I really began to come to terms and understand kind of the ways in which disability was an asset. And then I also participated in high school in a program called the Alabama Governor's Youth Leadership Forum. And California has a version of the Youth Leadership Forum, and that the Youth Leadership Forum is specifically for young people with disabilities, and helping them gain skills and develop as leaders with disabilities. So it was through my participation in the YLF program that I really began to understand what disability and what disability leadership can actually look like. I think before participating in that program, I convinced myself that to be a leader, you kind of have to be the person that walks into a room and everyone looks at, and you're just fabulous and stunning and everyone loves you and everyone pays attention. Even though I'm speaking to you today, I've never related to that person. I feel like that's never been who I am and never who I'm comfortable being. But it was through YLF that I really began to understand that disability and leadership can look different. That there are different ways to be a leader. For me, what has helped me in my journey and in my development is I don't think of it as, I have to change the world. But, how I think of it as, but I can't help connect people I know, various communities, to resources. I can connect them to information. I can get them in positions of power. So it really is, for me, I think it started me to understand that you can create change, you can be a leader just by helping your friends and family. Don't ever underestimate the differences and the ripples that can create. We all would love to be Malala, the Obamas. But, and if that's your path of life, great, please keep my email. But for other of us, maybe it is just helping our family and friends. And that is equally important and creates an equal amount of change. And I think YLF helped me in understanding that. So
Honestly, I 100% agree. I do, as I mentioned, I do come from a community where poverty was something, like homelessness was something that surrounded my family, and not being able to have access to multiple resources, because I do come from a mixed status family, so I feel that for me, it wasn't necessarily that the information was not there, it's just that the resources were not kind of falling through to a lot of the people that actually needed those resources. So once I started getting more involved, the information I learned, the first people I went through was to my friends and family. I'm like, yo, you gotta do this because this and that, and now it's trying to push them to have access to that, because as we mentioned, we do sometimes we carry that privilege. Right now, I have that privilege where there's certain resources that are being provided towards me, which I try to provide towards my community members so they could be able to have access to those resources just as much as I can. And and it's going from there as we start sharing that information. So I thank you for that. Honestly, that is, I think, very crucial, because it starts with those around you and it starts building from there, at least in my opinion, towards making sure that we help support as many people as we can. But with that in mind, I'm gonna pass it to Cami and Evan, who are the other two moderators, and allow them to do the Q&A section.
It's been so good to hear from you so far, Ryan. I'm gonna pass it to Evan to give his quick image description before we hop into Q&A questions. So this is a reminder, if you haven't already put your questions in the Q&A, you can do so now so that we can ask those to Ryan.
Hello, everybody. I am one of the youth volunteers. I am Evan Milburn, he, him, his. I'm a blonde hair, blue eye male with APERT syndrome, APERT syndrome. And I'm excited to be here. And I'm calling in from lovely Brisbane, California. You get bonus points if you have any idea where that is. And I'll pass it back to Cam. You get these Q&A started.
Thanks, Evan. So we have a really great question here from Ellen, who asks, what would you advise BIPOC disabled teens to help them gain introspection and confidence? And I think this goes off of your last question or your last answer about community and intersectionality.
So I think confidence is always a difficult struggle. It at least has been for me. And I think people in life, if they don't acknowledge that confidence is harder to come by, then it's usually the same people that shouldn't be as confident about what they're doing in life. So the second you're not struggling with confidence, it's probably the same second that you should also be worrying about what you're doing in life. And one of my dear friends, and I know it's hard and I would hate it when people would say it to me, there is something to fake it till you make it. But I would also add to, it's not just faking it till you make it, but understand that, again, your existence is revolutionary. Like, you know, the fact that we are on a webinar today, we all have such different journeys that we're so statistically unlikely in a number of ways. So know that wherever you are in life, whatever you're doing, in so many ways, you've already beat the odds and you're going to continue to do that. So you should be confident in that. And then when in doubt, like even though I'm, speaking today, I am not a very assertive person in a lot of environments, but what sometimes helps me to be more assertive is to think about my close friends, my family, the people that I know that I think of. If I don't mention it, who will? So know that, when you're in certain meetings, when you're in certain environments, if it helps you to build the confidence to take up that space, try and tell yourself and remind yourself, if you don't bring it up, who will? There may be someone that comes into the same space months or years from now, but you have the opportunity then to share your experience, to share your thoughts. So, if you can't do it for yourself, do it for the people you love, do it for the people that are coming behind you, that by you saying hey, this program didn't work for me, or, we could do a better job if we're mindful of these issues or these experiences. You're making it a little bit easier for folks who come behind you to raise other issues. We all know, the ADA is just the beginning. The ADA is the bare minimum. So if you're in spaces where folks still need to know about the ADA, remind yourself that even if it's hard for you to bring those up, you're enabling future conversations where folks can say, let's talk about disability justice. So if you can't do it for yourself, if you don't feel confident enough, try to remember, and do it for the people you love.
I love that just your existence as a person and as a person with multiple intersectional identities is a radical act, and finding confidence in the community and doing things for other people.
Thank you, Ryan, for that question. We have another question here, and it's more about young adults and kind of find that peer group. And we want your advice on it, because I know I've experienced it, and there's people in the audience who've obviously experienced it too. How do you best find your peer group of people with disabilities, when, especially in time like these, when it's kind of hard to get out, so to speak?
I think, especially in a pandemic, primarily the way of connecting is through various online platforms. I think if you don't have online access, find ways of calling organizations, letting them know of your situation, that you don't have reliable online access, and hopefully they can help you find reliable ways of having online access. But I think primarily right now, especially in the pandemic, and especially, well, the disability community has long been very active online, and it has a long history of online activism. So, but I think, start trying to build in ways that feel safe and comfortable for you to build those online presence, and follow subjects and reach out to people that you see that are tweeting or sharing information that relates to you and speaks to your experiences. But I think online is the place to start.
Related to that, we have a question about how you can find mentorship, and why is mentorship important for people in the disabled community?
Well, number one, and I acknowledge this is sometimes hard, but if you meet someone and you're like, I like where your life is, help me get to where you are, or help me understand your perspective, ask them. Like, directly ask them. Because most of the time, if someone finds it within themselves to say, I want to benefit from your knowledge, I have a very hard time saying no. So step one, if you see someone that you want to be your mentor, ask them directly. There are other programs and other outlets that will help connect you to mentors. And I can send a few links to organizations that specifically focus on developing mentor relationships after this webinar. But there are organizations that specifically try to connect people with disabilities, marginalized individuals, to mentors. But I would say, if you come across individuals that you want to understand their life journey, you want to gain from their knowledge, ask them. And why is it important? Because the second you're not learning, you're in trouble. Everyone learns, everyone can improve. We're all in learning journeys. When I talk about the work of WITH, I talk about the fact that I myself have disabilities. I myself do have historically resilient identities, but there are things I learn from our advisory committee every day. There are ways in which the advisory committee challenges me, helps me rethink how we do things. So really, mentorship is the same way. We're all in a learning journey, and look to those mentors to help challenge you and help you rethink how you're approaching things, how you're doing things every day. And if you ever find yourself at a point in life where you're like, I'm done learning, you're not done learning. You can always learn more. You can always do better. Find ways to have moments of joy and moments of celebration in your life, but you're never truly done learning. So that's why mentorship is important.
Thank you. That was such a great answer.
Can I get a little bit of wonkish for a second? And when I say wonkish, it's a little bit academic, but I want to share something I've learned in my own learning journey as far as using the term multi-marginalized. And it's a term that I have used for years, but currently where I am, based off of what I'm reading and conversations I've had with other members of the community, I'm trying to shift to use the term historically resilient identities. And that's because in some ways, when we say multi-marginalized, it puts the onus and puts the pressure on us as, individuals, like it's something we have to compensate for, where the problem is not the fact, I'm Black, I'm gay, I have disabilities. The problem is society. I have to be resilient. So I would encourage those of you to kind of, if you can and if you feel comfortable, embrace the using terms like historically resilient identities, because it is not your fault, how you exist. It is your experiences, your identities are not your fault. So it's really society that needs to change, society that needs to do a better job embracing who we all are and embracing our identities and experiences.
That connects a lot to the social model of disability, using the term disabled versus other terms.
Yes, I agree. And if it matters, I'm a big believer in when I speak on behalf of the organization, I will use people first language, because I personally don't believe that organizations are people. So I will always use people first language when speaking for the organization. But when I'm speaking for myself or my communities, I will use identity first language because I'm an individual. But at least for me, if it's helpful, that's the decision I've made and I'm comfortable with, as far as identity first versus people first language. And that's also why in today's webinar, you probably heard me use a mix of the two.
Thank you, Ryan, for that. You talked about throughout this webinar, you talked about continued learning. Is there anything that you would wish you'd known a lot earlier, in you wish you knew a lot earlier in your disability advocacy journey, that you may have just recently learned or discovered?
I wish disability justice had existed earlier than 2015. So I would encourage, if you haven't already, please take a look at the primer that Send Invalid has that really goes and dives deep into the framework of disability justice. And when I think about things I wish I had known more about and wish existed sooner, disability justice. And then I can only underline what I've shared with you today, that I really wish earlier in my journey, I didn't spend so much time convincing myself that, there was only one way to be a leader, that it is equally as important if you're just making a difference to your family, your friends, the people who live in the street across from you. Like, that is equally as important as, folks that can talk to presidents. So there are multiple ways to be a leader. There are multiple ways to be an advocate. And as long as you're finding ways that you feel comfortable in bringing who you are, bringing your experiences to bear in your work and in your communities, that's what you need to be doing. There is no right way to do it. There shouldn't be a hierarchy. And, this leader is more important than that leader. We're all creating ripples of change. So that's what I would add and underline.
Thank you so much. I think that brings us to a pretty good stopping point. We are unfortunately just about out of time for today. So before I do our final wrap up, I want to ask if there's any last thoughts you want to share with us, Ryan. It's been so wonderful talking with you.
I just want to, again, underline that I know things are hard, especially in the pandemic, but you're here today, you're existing, you're all on your learning journeys, but please give yourself a pat on the back for making it this far, and know that we all have a part to play in advancing disability inclusion and disability justice. And every day that you choose to show up, to continue and learning more about yourself, to continue to be open with those that you feel comfortable and safe to do so with, you are advancing disability inclusion. You are advancing disability justice. So I thank you for that, and know that, a lot of what I do, I hope that I can, kick open a window so that one day one of you walks through the door. So keep doing what you're doing. And if at any point I can be helpful in connecting you to other individuals, to other organizations, please reach out. And thank you for the work that Yo is doing in general. Y'all do some awesome work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Ryan. It has been an honor to speak with you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And yes, I will definitely share my email, as well as I will share different links to mentoring organizations, as well as the link to Sins Invalid after
Great.
this webinar. So I trust that they will send that out after.
Yes, we can get those out if you get them to us. And we are so excited to announce our next speaker series event is 1 month from today. It is March 24th. That's a Thursday at 3 p.m. And we will have Nikki Booker with us here. So we are super excited for that event. So there will be a link in the chat shortly to register for that event. And again, thank you to CFILC, our wonderful interpreters and captioners, our staff, Jessica, Evan, Ryan, thank you all so much for being here today. Have a wonderful day. And when you close out Zoom, a Survey Monkey will open asking for feedback on today's event.